Good evening. Population experts are now predicting that halfway through this century there'll be at least 35 million of us, competing for food, land and whatever we can. Now a member of Kelvin Rudd's government is calling for massive cuts to immigration before it's too late. And the world's top expert on population agrees. Here's Brian Seymour.
Is this our future?
Australia is already in deep trouble, way beyond its carrying capacity.
I don't want to see Melbourne become a city like Mumbai or Shanghai or Mexico City.
If you've noticed something different about your suburb, your city, you're not imagining things. In the year to July 30, 900,000 new people came to work and live in Australia.
Food shortages, water shortages, housing affordability, overcrowded cities, transport congestion, loss of species, waste, terrorism, all these things we can only tackle if we are prepared to confront population.
What evidence do you see around you here in Melbourne that population growth is out of control?
I believe that Melbourne's a beautiful city, and the population projections for Melbourne are Melbourne at 5 million in a relatively short time, and I don't think that is the right thing for Melbourne. I also see these things in places like Sydney and Brisbane.
Kelvin Thomson is the federal Labor MP for Wills in Victoria, where the population is growing faster than anywhere else in the country.
Clearly the things which influence population, migration and the birth rate. Our migration rate has skyrocketed in recent times, so since the mid-1990s we had a net migration rate of around 82,000. That has since doubled.
How is population affected by immigration? Well, if we look 11 years ago in 1998, and we welcomed 85,120 people to our shores. Skip forward 11 years in 2008-09 and 232,098 new Australians came here. On top of that, over 600,000 were issued temporary work and study visas. Many of them hope to become permanent residents. Now that's a total of more than 900,000 in 1 year, affecting everything from waste management, transport to housing affordability. The question is, are we still within our limits, or do we need to act now?
What's crystal clear is Australia should have a shrinking population.
From his office at Stanford University in California, Professor Paul Ehrlich wages a war he has championed for 5 decades.
Agricultural production has spurted ahead very rapidly. Agricultural production is not food production.
Professor Ehrlich's seminal book, The Population Bomb, published in 1968, predicted the sudden massive increase in people over the last century would quickly cause mass hunger, environmental destruction, and the end of humanity. It hasn't happened yet.
In the US media, and in the roughly 3 years watching the media that I've spent in Australia, I have yet to see anybody point out that the rate of climate change is directly connected with the size of the population.
Over the last century, humans have multiplied from 2 billion to more than 6.7 billion. Urban populations of Africa and Asia will double over the next 25 years. There are already 400 cities worldwide with mega slums in countries where population is barreling out of control, like Lagos, where 10,000 people arrive each week from Africa looking for work to survive. Professor Ehrlich believes Australia's mostly dry, arid landscape is already at tipping point.
If everybody had just a tiny coop and was given slop to eat and couldn't move or do anything else, you might manage to keep 6.8 billion people alive. But who would want to live that way? Not Australians, I'll tell you that.
I never agreed with Peter Costello's comment about one for mum and dad and one for the country. I think that was the wrong attitude to take.
The Rudd government pays the Howard and Costello baby bonus, more than $5,000 for having a child. If anything, Kelvin Rudd has built on the population-boosting measures started under John Howard, with immigration now at its highest ever level. Now, Communist China is moving towards scrapping its one-child policy. What does that mean for the world's ever-expanding population? How much more will we pay for food, power, services, or will we go hungry?
And the best estimates are that you need to double food production by 2050.
Biologist and food scientist Dr. David Tribe is certain technology will save us, comfortably feeding 10 billion of us. In the meantime, he urges Australia to keep immigration up and increase foreign aid.
If you're going to make any impact on the big issue of population, you're going to have to solve the poverty problem first.
Dr. Tribe, Kelvin Thomson and Professor Ehrlich all say one thing in common. Improving living standards in poor countries will mean they have fewer children, solving the population problem once and for all. What would you like to see happen here in Australia to stabilise our population?
If we were to reduce our migration rate from the levels it's got to, of the order of 170,000 back to 82,000, that would give our immigration authorities more time in which to better assess applicants for entry to Australia.
The Rudd government MP is adamant that slashing immigration by more than half would reduce the threat of terrorism and immediately and massively reduce our impact on climate change.
It's a very simple thing to say that all our problems in Australia are due to population. And that's essentially what Mr. Thomson is saying there.
In truth, population is no problem at all, according to Professor Peter MacDonald. He's the director of the Australian Demographic and Social Research Institute.
Immigration in Australia is driven very largely by labour demand, and it's going to be what it's going to be.
There are lots of people who are either resigned to population growth and think that it's inevitable, or who advocate population growth and think that it's good for us. Now, I don't agree with them. I think they're completely wrong. I think that many of the problems that we are now facing can be sourced back to population growth.
In our favour, Australia is one of the least populated and wealthiest countries in the world. But for how long?
But both China and India are trying to catch up. And when they catch up, then it's really going to be bad.
Our population right now is just a few thousand off the 22 million mark. Brian Seymour with that report. Now,